And what we cannot do is simply take the view that we have today, apply policies to it to force it into the system and bet on that for the next 100 years. That's a mistake.
Yes.
And that's what I fear in terms of our biggest challenge, is that we get stuck in that rut.
Yes. Yes. You know, the goal of energy transition, and maybe I have a feeling maybe there is a better phrase than energy transition, because like you said, transition indicates moving from one to the other, but it really is energy management. It really is, you know, it's the energy impact. When we look at, I go back to using the phrase energy transition. Our goal is to produce energy, whether it is from renewable, whether it is from fossil fuels, in a way that it has minimal environmental impact. Because even renewable projects have an environmental impact, right? And so it's not as if that you could put a wind farm offshore and it has an environmental impact. Everything has an environmental impact, and everything has to be considered. The goal would be to produce energy where it doesn't affect our atmosphere. Now, in order to make that successful, that transition, and to achieve that goal, what do you see as the critical success factors? What do you see as the biggest risk? What will prevent the globe from getting there? If whatever the goal may be, you know, in 30 years, 50 years, what do you think is going to come in the way? What is it that society, that governments, and even the industry, both the oil and gas industry and the energy industry, has to keep a close eye on?
Yeah. Well, I believe also in one fundamental issue that we're all challenged by, and that is that we are trapped by what we know,
Yes.
what we believe today.
Yes.
And so making choices for the next 50 to 100 years through that lens is really, really myopic. And so I look at some of the declarations that I see in terms of whether we're going to have all electric vehicles, or whether we're going to have net zero by 2035, or all these sort of political pontifications in terms of where we're going to go. And to really step back from that and say, what is my roadmap to getting emissions to the point where I can actually live in a net zero carbon world? That's not going to happen with today's technologies and people fighting about whether wind is better than gas, is better than coal. That's not going to happen. That will never happen. It's a formula for nothing but angst and inefficiency. And so investing in the future, in the transformation of where we want to go as a society, is the single hardest thing to do. People have a hard time making bets on the future and having the confidence that they can get there. But it's kind of like when we first said we're going to go to the moon. We didn't decide what kind of rocket we were going to shoot, or how many guys were going to be in the rocket ship, or all of the things that we had in the early 60s to make that happen. We knew we were going to have to reinvent ourselves and figure it out. But the objective was to get to the moon. Our objective is to get the emissions to zero over some time frame. And we need to put that roadmap together and be thoughtful about the fact that what we do today is really important. It's a bridge to that future. That future will not be defined by necessarily just windmills and solar panels or gas-fired electricity. And surely 100 years from now, if we're still shoveling coal into a boiler to make electricity, as a society, we have not progressed. at all, okay?
Yes.
And you look at things like nuclear and you make a decision that, well, I'm not going to do any more nuclear because we've had a few incidents. The idea is to take technology like that and reinvent it, pivot, and
Yes.
make it something that can be transformative.
So it's a million times safer. I mean, we're advancing technology in every field. Why can't we do it in nuclear? If we figured out safe nuclear, we would solve the energy equation in a big way.
But you're not going to make plastics with nuclear power plants either,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so we have all these other challenges associated with our energy value chain,
Yes.
where we've got feedstocks, we've got technologies, we've got waste, we've recycling opportunities, things of that nature. It all has to be pulled together. And what we cannot do is simply take the view that we have today, apply policies to it, to force it into the system and bet on that for the next 100 years. That's a mistake.
Yes.
And that's what I fear in terms of our biggest challenge, is that we get stuck in that rut.
So how do we make sure that we don't fall in that rut? What do we, who are the people who need to understand this? And how do we make sure that that goal is not missed, that society actually progresses? And who will lead? Who do you see as leading? Is it government leading? Is it industry leading? Is it activists leading? Does everybody need to get together? How do we make this change happen?
Sure, everybody needs to be involved. And I think at the end of the day, people make up society. Society makes up the movement that's going to occur. And universities and industries and science and all the things will not just follow, but also be a part of that movement. But I'm going to ask you to consider something today.
Yes.
Is that I would imagine you, or certainly your next door neighbor, has very recently been in line in a drive-through at Starbucks or McDonald's.
Yes.
Waiting for your whatever.
Yes.
And you're sitting in your car and you're texting on your phone.
Yes.
And you might even have a bumper sticker on your back that says, I care about the environment. Yes. Right?
Yes.
And yet the disingenuous behavior of most of the people in the developed world, forget about the undeveloped world.
Yes.
That's what I wonder about going forward. I see people wanting to pat themselves on the back for being concerned about the environment and really caring about the energy transition. But when it gets down to it, nobody wants to pay any more. Nobody wants to have any less reliability or be inconvenienced in the least bit. And they believe it's all going to fall on the back of industry, and magically it won't end up affecting them commercially. And I think it's an incredibly naive set of beliefs in the marketplace that over a generation is going to have to change, because if it doesn't, you're going to end up with this disingenuous mismatch. And
I love that point. I think I recently saw a chart, and I can't remember the details, but something that struck me was the chart was depicting the emissions. And I was doing some research for the global gas symposium that's coming up in August at the Houston Strategy Forum. And they talked about emissions from natural gas as a result of natural gas, right? The whole value chain. And they then compared it for emissions from agriculture, right? And so we are a culture that consumes meat. We consume a lot of meat. And that creates a lot more emissions because of that food choice, right? And so I'm not here to judge, but I'm trying to enhance your point, is that society does have choices to make, so that's one example. The other example is energy conservation. We're all talking about producing clean energy, but if we all figure out how to use energy more efficiently, we're still wasting energy, right? We waste food, like crazy as a society. We waste energy like crazy as a society. And so,
Ravi, I'm sure you know this, but if you look at any macro view of the energy value chain from raw materials to end products,
yes,
it is a fact that we waste 70% of the energy inputs before we actually create outputs.
wow,
We waste 70%.
yes,
Now, that's not something most people really understand.
yes,
But on top of that, that's people that actually have access to energy. There's
yes,
3 billion people in the world that don't even have any
have
energy.
access.
And
Yes,
so they're not going to conserve.
yes,
They don't even have anything.
yes,
But as the world evolves, they're going to want energy. They're going to want to have
yes,
it. And so
yes,
this idea that we're going to conserve ourselves to ultimately the end result, that's not going to happen. The same way we're not all going to become vegetarians, Robbie.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
We're going to keep eating meat. We got to figure out a way to do it more efficiently and effectively.
yes. So it's, so energy transition, a big component of that also has to include energy efficiency,
Sure.
right? And so
Sure.
we have to attack the equation from both sides.
Mhm.
We say, all right, we reduce the carbon emissions and other emissions so that we get to net zero, but we also have to create efficient uses of energy and efficient production of energy.
There is also a naive belief that industry is the evil part of the value chain here. And all we need to do is fix those industry guys and we'll all be okay. And what's interesting in our country, there are 13 states that produce over 80% of the energy that's consumed in the United States. 13 states, okay? So that tells you that the other 37 states are taking more energy than they actually produce. So they are takers.
Yes.
And they feel very comfortable about the fact that they've got no facilities in their states.
Yes.
They're not doing pollution and everything else, except they're driving their cars around. They're using the plastics and they're taking all this energy and they don't think it's their problem. The problem's down there in Texas.
Yes.
And that's what we got to do is fix that stuff in Texas and everything will be great. And that's the thing that's really annoying about this whole conversation about the energy transition.
Yes, no, I appreciate that point. It's really having the right perspective and being authentic, right? Because sometimes all of this becomes is finger pointing, but that's not going to help us. We really want to get serious and find the solutions because the stakes are really high.
Yeah. So park your car when you go to Starbucks, turn the engine off and go inside and get your coffee.
Yes.
Before you start talking about how much you care about the environment.
Yes, sir. I gave up on drinking coffee, and so
I'm not using you as an example. I'm more of a royal you.
Quit the sugar and the carbohydrates, Ravi. So now I'm helping myself and the environment both.
Well, good for you. Good for you.
My lovely bride feeds me or keeps me on a diet of celery. So that's what now we're solving real problems.